So how do you think that the clinicians can have a better system of tracking their outcomes?
Right. So this is a difficult question for me, right? Because we're pretty far down the line in terms of that development. We have a proprietary database that we've built. What happens is patients come into our clinics around the country. They fill out their metrics. They're in the database, and then they fill out the metrics every visit. And within 14 days of the third visit, our database has a built-in algorithm, and that algorithm can tell whether the patient is meeting an IMC standard of outcome or not. And then what occurs is if it's not, then it alerts our organization. And every week we have the clinicians with their list of patients that weren't meeting the standard based on the database algorithms. And they meet with a high-level senior trained tutor. And that's a weekly grand rounds process that we have so that our clinicians are on a never-ending learning curve, but their patients' outcomes can be guaranteed to any payer system so that we can go in and use our database for those purposes. And so we have a fairly sophisticated one. It's not something that's accessible by all of your listeners, but your listeners can very simply do pen to paper and then take an hour at night or at lunchtime or after work, and then go ahead and just put those numbers on an Excel spreadsheet. And they can do that regularly. I mean, if that's the lowest level that's possible, but it's very doable. And they can monitor patients' progress very simply using the Excel spreadsheets, because you can put formulas into the spreadsheets themselves, and that only takes a couple hours on Google to learn how to do that. So that's at a very base level. They can get online and figure out how to build a very simple database, or they can pay a programmer to create a little simple database for them. For that matter, I suppose they could even contact our organization and see what the availability of our database and the quality assurance around that is. You'd have to talk to our director of operations, and there'd be some fee associated with it. But those are the options.
Yeah. And what are the things that you think are important to track in terms of results to check if you are being efficient?
Right. So if you go into the literature, let's just take one index, for instance. So the Rowland-Morris, which is a well-recognized index for monitoring whether your approach to someone's lumbar spine problems is effective, right? Within the metric itself, there are standards that have to be met, so that minimally clinically important difference. You've heard of this. So that you can determine whether or not you are successful. So if I'm starting out, what I do is if I'm going to use the Rowland-Morris, I would determine within the scientific literature what the minimally clinically important difference is. And then I would see if by the third to fifth visit, if my patient was meeting that metric. And if so, I would consider my approach to have some value, and therefore I am being effective. That would be the play. So, they can go into the literature. There are a number of indices. They can determine which ones they think is best suited for their population, and they could monitor the outcomes.